Hey guys, so I'm getting ready to discuss my two chapters of Framing Peace, chapters 5 and 7. I'm going to start with chapter 5. Chapter 5 discussed restorative justice. Restorative justice truly means bringing back the peace and truly addressing and acknowledging all the parties involved and affected by any sort of wrongdoing. It really seeks to address who has been hurt, what their needs are, and what needs to be done in order to repair their hope. And the example given in the book, it talks about a little boy who is making crude gestures in class. And instead of just suspending this boy and giving him a consequence for doing something inappropriate, when restorative justice is practiced, then they really all come together, the boy, the teacher, the principal, his parents, and later some of the students, to discuss what has happened, who has all been affected, how they have been affected, how they feel, really in a way that's very vulnerable, so that the person who has caused this problem truly understands the effects of their actions, as well as the people who are affected understand why this problem has happened, so that all parties can come together and truly find a way to reflect on the past and discuss ways to come up with a way to make the future better and to solve the problem, and truly make sure that everyone involved or impacted is heard, understood, and addressed. And I think that that is very important. At the bottom of this, I put, why is this important in our communities? Because I feel like this is important in our communities, because how many times are people who are in charge of fixing the problem, how many times are they at tables that do not include people who are directly affected by whatever that problem is? I mean, there are so many different avenues that we could take with this. Just for time's sake, I'm not going to even begin to wiggle down any of those rabbit holes. But I just think that that is very important. You know, we discuss so much how our history plays a role in our present, which is 100% true. So when we are looking at our history, we need to make sure that we are practicing restorative justice to create a better future. And we need to make sure that everybody who has been impacted by anything in our future, again, so many different avenues that we could take with this, but just ensuring that the people who are most affected by problems have the opportunity to be heard and be included in the decision making moving forward. It's often that we allow people to be heard and then we cut them off there, and we don't allow them to be a part of the solution making process either. So it's very important in restorative justice, but in general, that we are making sure that we are acknowledging all parties affected by any sort of issue, understanding the ripple effects that actions have, and understanding and acknowledging everyone who is impacted and involved, and truly coming up with ways to work together to ensure that things are appropriately being addressed and issues are appropriately being fixed, and coming up with solutions that are the best. The next part of this chapter really delve into humanism. And I thought that this was very important, because so often we allow people's lives to be taken for granted because they are different. And we have created these frames that allow certain lives to be valued and others to not be. And again, so many avenues that we can take with this, but you know, this chapter really discussed on or discussed the importance of allowing ourselves to address those frames, allow ourselves to be vulnerable and uncomfortable as we address these frames, and really internalize these issues as we understand how understand and deconstruct the other and us relationship, because that idea of the other people, other cultures, other nationalities, that separation really allows us to dehumanize so many people, and to not see their lives as nearly as valuable as ours, or people like us. So again, I'm not going to read all of my slides to you. I'll allow you guys to read them yourself, but I will take a second to observe this and read this quote at the bottom. And it says, being human is to accept our vocation of becoming more fully human. And that just means that it is our job daily, hourly, by the second, to continue the process of becoming more human as we recognize people as people. And it is as simple as that. One example that I really think and really find very important, partially because my brother served in Iraq, is how we just completely ignore all of the civilian lives that were and are taken through war via our soldiers in other countries, and we don't bat an eye. You know, we have deemed these people as less than human, and I don't understand why, because they are. So it's very interesting to look at our frames and how our frames has allowed us to mourn the 3,000 lives lost on September 11th for years and years past, and to completely never acknowledge or recognize the hundreds of thousands of civilian lives that have been lost in the Middle East, with us, with their blood on American hands. So I think that that's very difficult. That's a very difficult conversation for people to have, but it's a very necessary conversation for people to have as we begin the process of breaking down those frames and understanding the need to acknowledge other people simply as human. The chapter goes on then to discuss positive peace. So that mention of war leads me into this next slide. And it's very important when discussing positive peace, because the first time I heard that term, you think, well, positive peace, well, what possibly could negative peace be? How could peace be negative? But it can, when you only view it as peace being something that can only be won through war. Negative peace is something is that idea of achieving peace through war, whereas positive peace is more so something that is continuously practiced. How do we make the world better? How do we combat social justice issues within our own society, within our own home, within ourselves? How are we constantly using peace as a verb? How are we practicing peace rather than how are we attaining peace? What are the steps that we need to do to obtain peace? Those are not that is not how it should be. Peace should be something that is continuously practiced and not viewed as a trophy to be won after a huge fight. I will point out a couple of things from this slide again. It talks about, or one thing that is at the end of this book that I found very relevant, says that peace is so much more than the absence of war, just as sobriety entails so much more than the absence of alcohol. This truly resonated with me. Not to get too personal, but I have several family members who suffer from addiction, and so I am very, very aware how it is not the absence of a substance that allows someone to be sober. There are so many other wars going on within people, and so many other battles that need to be won. It's not simply the absence of a substance, just as peace is not simply the absence of war. To look at peace as so simplistic is, very naive. Peace is a very complex idea, and again, to view it as not is simply naive. Peace comes in many different forms. It is in everything that we do. It's in the discourses of our past. It's in our history, down to the way that we look at things. There's so many different things that go into peace, just as there are so many different things that go into sobriety. So it's just very important to understand the complexities that come along with the idea of peace, and how many different ways it can be practiced on a very small scale, and then on very large scales as well. I'm going to move on to chapter 7 for time's sake. Chapter 7 talked about teaching peace in elementary schools, which was very relative to me as a kindergarten teacher. The 3 different ways that it discussed practicing peace in school was the contemplative, which allowed or which talked about how teachers and students hold the same amount of intelligences, which I thought was just absolutely phenomenal. And then it discussed how peace is not a fixed characteristic, it's practiced. And in that way of practicing peace, it discussed how children have the ability and the autonomy to learn to practice peace on their own, which I think is very important. Actually, it leads to the next one, the negotiable, which discusses how humans will learn regardless of school. So that kind of goes and ties in to the one prior to that, because it discusses how children can be autonomous. They can construct peace on their own. They're going to learn how to do it even if they're not in school. So it's very important to give them that opportunity. The contemplative allows children to think about ways to practice peace and to solve problems and things like that. The negotiable allows students to come discuss the issues themselves, negotiate ways to solve the problem. The obedient really ties into what's going on in America right now with the argument of law and order. And it discusses this little girl who has gotten in trouble a few times in class, and now she is labeled as the person who has done something, the culprit of some sort of issue. And I think that this one is very important, because so often our children in our elementary schools get labeled as repeat offenders, and that term just completely parallels with our prison system and how we would describe people who continuously get locked up, which is very, I don't want to be politically incorrect and say a bad term, but very interesting to me how we would describe a child that way, and then deny the possibility of things like the school to prison pipeline. But anyway, I just think that it's very important in understanding how we begin to frame children at such a young age as obedient or disobedient, and how that will follow them for the rest of their school lives and the rest of their lives in general, that ideology of themselves. And because I only have 50 seconds left in my screencast, I just want to discuss the glorification of war. Again, war is not the only way to obtain peace, and we really need to make sure that our children understand that when we discuss our history and the different types of wars that we have, and so that they understand that there were other options, and there are other options and ways to solve problems. Because when we glorify war, we desensitize them to war, which will lead them to not treating others or not valuing others as human beings, and not valuing life in general. I'm going to pause there because I am out of time. But thank you guys so much. Bye-bye.